All right, guys, the Browns aren't the only team with a weird quarterback situation going into the offseason here. The New York Giants, I thought they had a really good offseason. I put them 7th in my rankings of who had the best, worst off seasons because I just did think they added a lot of talent, but still a lot of questions about how are they going to manage this quarterback situation. Signed Jameis first, then signed Russ to not an insignificant deal, and then come back and trade back up into first for Jaxson Dart. Jori, how do you think this all plays out? Like, I assume because Brian Daboll came out and said Russ is still our starter. I think he's going to go with that, but for how long? And what does Jameis come in next? Does Jaxson Dart see the field at all this year? How does the fact that Brian Daboll is kind of coaching for his job affect all of this? How did the Giants manage this kind of unusual quarterback situation?
Right. The way I described it when the Giants drafted Jaxson Dart was that Russ is the win now guy and Jaxson Dart is the create hope for later guy. And by no means do I think either of those are guaranteed outcomes, but that is the goal by the New York Giants. I think when I look at this, I say, I still believe that Jameis Winston was the ideal bridge quarterback because he's the type of guy who will show you the upside. He'll show you what it looks like. Well, then he'll also show you the downside because he'll throw a lot of interceptions. And then when like a month and a half into the season, you get a little bit tired of all of the interceptions and all of the turnovers, you have your transition to the rookie. Well, that's not what happens when you bring in Russell Wilson. I think Russell Wilson has the job. And until he actively loses games for them, I think he keeps it probably at least until end of October, early November. I think that people view Jaxson Dart as someone who's athletic. He's got good size. He's got a big arm, but he has a lot of quarterback development still. I mean, there's the traits and then there's the technique and how he has applied the traits. And I don't think that people feel super confident that Jaxson Dart is ready-made to succeed in the NFL immediately. And so if you're the Giants, you don't want to rush this. Now, the problem is if you don't show anything from Jaxson Dart this year and you're not winning games, you're not coming back for 2026. And so I think that you have a situation where as many times as you can try and get Russell Wilson to win games for you, you keep running that so that Jaxson Dart can still be your like escape hatch, and then you see what happens from there.
I think when you look at this situation, we're trying to call this right now in, late April, when really what's going to matter is July, August, early September, some preseason games. They're going to want to see Jaxson Dart, frankly, pick up the offense because he's coming out of an Ole Miss offense. It's a little wonky. And again, Jori mentioned the traits. He's got the traits. There are things there definitely that make him a first-round pick, but you don't know functionally whether he's going to be able to absorb a pro-style offense with all the different things you have to manage, with reading the defenses. Like if he shows an advanced learning curve on that, then all of a sudden in August, you're probably sitting there going, we could probably bump him up to backup. No offense to Jameis, but, we want to have an experienced third quarterback on the roster. Jameis can both support Russ and also support Jaxson Dart in the classroom, having been experienced, pretty much being exuberant about chipping in any way. I mean, Jameis is every quarterback room he's ever been in has loved him. So I think if Dart is on an advanced learning curve, he ends up being that backup quarterback going into the regular season. And then you wait and see how it unfolds. If Russ plays really well and Dart never sees the field, that's a champagne problem. You're like, oh, great. We got a redshirt year out of him. Russ played well enough. We've won some games. Maybe I don't think they're going to be a playoff team, but let's talk about the ceiling here. Maybe they squeak into the playoffs and all of a sudden that's resolved itself. If it goes the opposite way, I think ultimately the way that Brian Daboll, keeps his job into 2026 is eventually they get Dart on the field at some point in the season when it's going wrong with Russ. And then he shows growth. If you can show growth with Jaxson Dart getting starting snaps in November or December into January, ownership's going to sit there and go, okay, well, it's on the right track. Now, do I want to take the guy away from the quarterback now that it's on the right track and then bring in another guy who's going to have maybe a whole new offense? We're already changing what Jaxson Dart is doing to prepare himself to be a successful quarterback in this league. So to me, that's the two tracks. If you're Brian Daboll that you're looking at, being successful, maybe Russ does well, he keeps Dart on the bench and you get Dart some backup snaps, or you make the switch and you just are going in a positive direction that shows that Dart is picking it up and going to be able to hit the ground running as a starter in 2026. I think if the downside, if this is a floor situation, it goes wrong with Russ. Dart is slow picking up the offense. Everything goes bad, and then they're sitting there staring at a top pick next year. Then I think that's the scenario where ultimately you see the coaching staff and maybe the general manager get fired.
And one thing they're going to have to navigate is everybody's going to want Jaxson Dart playing. Everybody's going to call for Jaxson Dart to play within the first month of the season. Like, it's inevitable.
Likely.
Well, if Russ wins games for them, not necessarily, but I think the other thing is the same way you could say it will be a great outcome if Jaxson doesn't play this year because that would mean Russ is playing well enough. I do not think that if you're Brian Daboll, can risk having Jaxson Dart start right away. Even if he looks good, I would be hesitant to do that because that's your last chance option. And so if your job is on the line, you need to make sure that you have something else to go to. You need to have a changeup ready in case, because what if Jaxson Dart looks incredible, but then 3 games into the season, he doesn't? Well, now kind of like Bryce Young situation benching, you don't have that luxury to bench the guy. So you need to make sure that you wait to play him until he's ready. And ideally, until you've tried something else that you show your ownership, you have an improvement option. So much of this is about expectations versus reality and having upward improvement as opposed to falling off at the end of the season. So what have you done for me lately?
You got to have that in your back pocket. Yeah, you have to. I'm with Jori 100%. I don't think the disaster here that you're just begging for would be to start Dart right away. Maybe he plays well in the preseason, but then he hits a meat grinder in September and October, and it's like, oh man, now do we have to sit this kid down? Like, is this becoming a point where mentally is he that? And I love that you brought up Bryce Young because really, that's what happened with Bryce Young. It was so bad that eventually mentally they're like, he needs a mental reset. We don't want to trade him. You know, we still think we can have him long term, but we can't keep putting him out there and have him getting battered like this. He'll never make it back. You do not want that situation with Dart. So I completely agree with Jori. Keep it in your back pocket. And then if you got to go to it in, say, November or beyond, and then, just show ownership. Okay, we're making strides here. Absolutely do that.
Jori, another NFC East team I want to ask you about because everybody loved the Dallas Cowboys draft. Everybody. I feel like I'm the only one saying, who's going to catch the ball at Dallas and who's going to run the ball at Dallas? Their skill positions are terrible. I'm going to move off of just complaining about it and ask you, what are their options right now? Is this Amari Cooper being re-signed, a reunion there? Is this them making a trade for a George Pickens or somebody like that, a Brandon Ayuk? What are the options for the Cowboys? How are they going to fix this before we start playing games?
Yeah, absolutely. I really liked the Cowboys' first round pick, which was Alabama guard Tyler Booker, because I think that the Cowboys' success has often correlated with their offensive line success. They needed someone to replace retiring all-pro right guard Zach Martin, and while we shouldn't expect Tyler Booker to be an all-pro in his first year, he has that upside. And so I think that historically, when the Cowboys have drafted an offensive lineman in the first round, it's been good. Again, we already talked about Johnny Manziel on this show. Well, who did they take instead of him? Zach Martin. People were not excited. He went to the All-Decades team and should probably be in the Hall of Fame as well. So now we look at it. At running back, they do have Javonte Williams from free agency, which I'm not saying he's got the highest upside, but he is probably going to be the starting running back. If the roster is as it is now, he will probably be the starting running back, and the hope would be that the offensive line would be significantly upgraded. I don't think that gives you as strong of a running game as you want, given the way that they have said they want to emphasize the running game under first-year head coach Brian Schottenheimer and offensive coordinator Clayton Adams, who has an offensive line background. You still have Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb, especially if Dak can return healthy. And I do think that they expect Kevontae Turpin, who is coming from special teams, to play a greater role in the offense. So I agree with you. They are not strong. I mean, Jake Ferguson's at tight end. They do not have an intimidating group of skill players the way that a lot of people do, including in division teams like the Philadelphia Eagles. And by the way, I would say the Washington Commanders too. I mean, Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel. So I definitely would rank them third or fourth on the skill players in the division. The question is, will they have enough pieces elsewhere? I also think there's a chance they're not done yet. But really, to me, what this comes down to is this is not about whether the Cowboys had a strong draft. This is about what they did in free agency, or really what they didn't do in free agency. Is they probably should have found someone, because this was not a strong receiver class. And I mean, I know we're going to get to the Packers and Matthew Golden, but I do think there were receivers in this class who were overdrafted relative to the production over the course of 3-4 years. And so I think that I understand why they didn't take a receiver super high. of them would have taken a running back, though a little probably second, third round, because then you say, well, this is a deep running back class and you need to be able to develop someone at that position.
Yeah, I'll give them credit for not reaching on the receiver in the first round. I'm totally fine. I when I did my notes column, I was like, I think this has to be a wide receiver or a corner. But I also said, look, I'll leave it open to the reality that when they take the best player available, they usually do pretty well, and especially with linemen, they have a great track record of taking really good offensive linemen. But my biggest thing was just don't push the wide receiver at this pick if it's not there. And I felt like it wasn't there, and they didn't push it. So I give them credit for that. I do think it still has to be addressed. I think they potentially could have addressed it in the second round. The only problem is when you start to get to that area, if you're looking for a legit number 2 receiver, which is what I think they're looking for, I don't think there's really any guarantees at that point that anybody in the second round and beyond was absolutely going to slot in as a legit number 2 receiver and be able to give you that kind of impact immediately. I think from a running back standpoint, it is what it is. They'll platoon. Sometimes running backs come available in training camp. You know, teams, you'll see a running back get cut in the final roster cut down, and maybe you have an option there to add a player before the season starts. The same with wide receivers. I think wide receivers can be available leading right up until training camp. I think also at the end of training camp, you will sometimes see wide receivers made available. I think they could address this in other ways. I don't know about Amari Cooper. Jori would have to really expound more on that about whether or not he could really, like, to me, I'm like, if you just want an experienced guy who knows Dak, who can come in, you know, be a number 2 for a year, a stopgap filler, you could probably do worse. Although I don't think, wasn't a great ending there for Amari Cooper with the Cowboys. And you have to wonder if there's some residue left over from that, which is why I say I'd lead on Jori on this one. But look, all in all, I don't think, I like their draft. And I like the fact that they didn't push it when they could have overdrafted a receiver. And if they didn't have the opportunity to trade down from 12, I'm a fan of building up the offensive line. I know they have just poured first round assets into that. I think if those first round assets hit, I don't care. I think it's great. So to me, there's no problem. There's particularly when it's so hard nowadays to actually get college offensive linemen who come in and play well right away. Well, they got the guy from the most pro-ready offense in college football whenever you take a guy out of the Alabama program.
Also, if y'all haven't listened to a Tyler Booker interview, then I think you should, because, he went to IMG, then Alabama, now he's with the Cowboys. He's basically been professional football in the sense of how he's been trained since high school. And it is absolutely reflected in the way that he answers these questions. And so I do think that I understand that. And yeah, as it relates to Amari Cooper, I would not be surprised if that happens. I think to me that the first question I would want to ask Amari is, how's your wrist doing? Because he really was not a production impact in Buffalo. I think you can say, well, was he taking away attention from other guys on the field? All that. I don't think he hurt Buffalo, but he did have the wrist injury. At first, he was on the field kind of playing through it. And so I would want to know where he is from a health standpoint. But Amari still lives in the Dallas area in the offseason. And so I definitely think that it's reasonable that he would say, okay, he'll be 31 in June. He might want to stay home. He's got his life there, get another year. And I think if I'm the Cowboys, I'm interested in that. It's not going to be for a ton of money, but Amari's made his money in his career. And so he might be open to that. Or maybe you have a really incentive-laden deal. And I also think I would be very clear that CeeDee Lamb is still my first receiver, because I don't think Amari is playing at his peak right now, but he will be able to help you in certain times. And he will be able to be another person on the field that another team, again, we talked about that NFC East competition. There are guys, the NFC East is going to have to be concerned about a healthy Amari more than they're probably currently going to have to be concerned about Jalen Tolbert or Kavonte Turpin. So it would definitely be an upgrade to the room as a whole for the right price.
Yeah, I think they need to do something like an Amari Cooper, just because there's nothing else there. There's some desperation here at the Cowboys. Let's take our last ad break. We will come back. We'll talk about a couple other teams and get you guys on. All right, Jori, you talked about the Green Bay Packers receivers, which is almost like the Cleveland Browns quarterback room. There's just a ton of guys in there, and I'm not sure there's a number one. How do you see this playing out? Do you think Matthew Golden, their first-round pick, comes in right away with a huge impact? Is he just another guy among some good receivers, but nobody great? Can he be the alpha? I really think the Packers need an alpha. Can Matthew Golden be that dude for the Packers that they really, really need?
It's so funny because I feel like the same way that from a fan perspective, people were really excited about the Jaguars and Travis Hunter. And then people in the league are like, oh, they gave up a lot to get Travis Hunter. I feel like fans were really excited about the Green Bay Packers drafting Matthew Golden. And there are some in the league who are like, I don't know. I don't know that he's so sure bet. Like he had one really strong year at the end of his career, but at Houston, he wasn't quite as consistent. Yes, he ran really quickly at the combine, but I have evaluators who believe that that speed didn't show up in the way that he played on his film, which is ultimately their guessing. And I was actually looking after some evaluators told me that at what our colleagues Nate Tice and Charles McDonald did for their big board. They were higher on him than the evaluators I have talked about. Now, I will say from a pure drama standpoint, the idea of Aaron Rodgers not being signed to a team, which could be all on him. The Steelers seem highly interested. I'm not questioning that. But Aaron Rodgers, if he was watching the draft, was sitting at home, the draft in Green Bay, and the Green Bay Packers, for the first time, I believe, since 2004, drafted a first-round receiver. So there's a lot of made-for-TV element there. And I do think there are people around the league who even had said, like, hey, let's just take the possibility. If our mock draft simulators are telling us that the Packers are taking a first-round receiver, just take it out because they're not factoring in the Green Bay Packers' historical trends. And then what do you know, the simulators had something to be saying. So I do think they needed a receiver. You can make the argument that if you wanted a receiver and you're in the 20s already, there were so few receivers that you weren't going to have like a great option in the third round. I still think that from a pure talent and production standpoint and consistency over the course of multiple seasons, we have not yet seen that from Matthew Golden, but I really like Jordan Love. I really like how Matt LaFleur can scheme guys. And so I think the upside is there, but I would not say that the floor is super high.
Feels like a lot of what they already had. I mean,
That's it, Charles. That's what I'm thinking. I'm like, okay, another like number 2 receiver, basically.
Right. Yeah. I mean, look, and then you go and you get Savion Williams in the third round out of TCU. It's a packed room. I'm sitting there and going, all right, are they just throwing all these resources at it and saying, we got to find 4 guys? We got like enough already. We have to find 4 guys and we have to find the appropriate roles for those 4 guys. Because really last year, the position regressed in a way that's alarming. Christian Watson hurt again. And, you know, you're like, how long are they going to stay on this merry-go-round with Christian Watson, who seemingly has everything to be a number 1, but can't be consistent and healthy all the time? Dontavian Wicks was that guy that I thought was really had all the tools, had moments where you're like, that looks like a number 1 receiver, but then he can't catch the ball, which is what he couldn't, he had problems in college and that reared its head. Jaden Reed, a guy who you would sit there and look at it and go, seems like a really high-end number 2, can do a lot of different things. You can hand the ball off to him. He can run at times, has the deep element to his game. Jaden Reed all of a sudden couldn't catch the football. And so you're like, it's so frustrating and maddening there. And then you go and you get, Matthew Golden, who, as Jori said, straight line speed in the 40 at the combine. Great. As the evaluators I talked to said the same thing, very limited production profile, and that he didn't look like a 4.29 guy who just ran by. Okay, let's just, throw a post at him, throw a slant at him, and he just absolutely, runs by guys and nobody can contain him. It did not feel that way. So you have to hope by taking him and hopefully thinking we're getting a number 1, you're thinking his arc of development really now is just starting to move toward taking the 4.29 speed and actually translating it onto the football field. That's a heck of a swing, I think, at this point. And again, as I said at the start, it just felt like another guy in that room where I'm like, are they getting these guys off an assembly line where they all look like maybe 2s, maybe 3s? They have these problems. There's no clear number 1. It's a tough situation to be in for them because I understand they really need to address it. And I know there's an element of really kind of desperation of getting 4 consistent, healthy players out of that room and then being able to implement them in roles and build forward with them understanding what their roles really are. You can't convince me right now. You can't tell me. You can't look at that depth chart when you're considering health and inconsistency and tell me exactly what's going to shake out in terms of 1, 2, 3, and 4, who's in the slot, who's on the outside, who's going to be there when September rolls around.
I do want to say that I think it's so interesting that whether or not we agree with the 40-yard dash, and I understand that the film speed should be more important. I did a story last year with Xavier Worthy after he reset the 40-yard dash record. And I asked evaluators and executives across the league, how much do you care about the 40-yard dash? And Rams general manager Les Snead told me that he thinks the 40-yard dash is extremely helpful for draft assessments, not in terms of evaluating players, but in terms of draft strategy, because historically, guys are pushed up on the draft board because of a fast 40, and they're pushed down if they're slow. And I think Matthew Golden is another example of that, of like, hey, this guy might not have been first round pick that high in terms of the receivers that went if it were not for that 40. And so yet again, decision makers will see that you should be aware that that guy, if you want him, is going to have to go higher because of his speed at the combine.
Definitely very interesting. I hope Matthew Golden works out. It was such a cool moment for him to get at Lambeau Field. He's got some juice, so we'll see, because I think the Packers need something. I think the Packers, that's a tough division. They need something to separate themselves and not just be this 10-11 win team that loses in the playoffs every year. We'll see where that's going. There still is some time left to go this offseason for teams to fix these problems, but not much. You better figure it out pretty quick. We're going to get out of here on that note. Thanks to everybody behind the scenes, our producer Stone and everybody. You can find me at Yahoo Schwab. She is at Jori Epstein. He is at Charles Robinson. As always, please rate and review the show. We love doing it. Thanks to everybody who joined all of our draft coverage over the weekend. It was a blast to do. We had fun, all the different storylines. That's all for today. We will see you next week on Inside Coverage.